In yesterday's video, we were looking for Bitcoin to have a bit of a short-term downside move. We're still in the same predicament here as well. However, traditional markets have been showing perhaps the real direction in the more near term. Now, looking at NASDAQ futures right here, we can see that this thing has actually been making consistently new lows this whole week. This whole week, while Bitcoin has actually been holding above its current low. So a lot of the questions and a lot of the comments and conversations on Twitter and other social media venues are, holy shit, are we seeing the decoupling again? And honestly, I don't think so, or at least I wouldn't. I think it's way too premature to be saying anything like that as of right now. We've seen this happen many times in the past, and what typically happens is that over the course of the next week or two, things come back into normality and do become correlated again. And seeing as traditional markets have already made new lows here, it does make me certainly a little bit more concerned for something like Bitcoin and probably the rest of cryptocurrencies as well. Doesn't mean that things can't bounce in the short term here. In fact, looking at NASDAQ, I do think that it is going to be finding another local low, kind of where it's at right now. It's already come down here by, I think, about 17 or 18%. Yeah, 1769, great number right there. So, long-term investors, I don't hate this area for long-term investments, but I certainly wouldn't want to be going all in at this point. Not that you should really ever be going all in. Just leave the nuts out and the shaft in. And in this case, this thing could easily set up for a bounce coming into next week, back above $19,000. But does that mean that Bitcoin plays catch up in the meantime? Well, I think that there's one chart that we haven't looked at this whole week that is quite compelling in that regard. Looking at Bitcoin, or sorry, not Bitcoin dominance, but Tether dominance right here, which has been pretty consistent actually. In getting the overall direction for Bitcoin, I'm still looking at this area here below about 5.5% as a likely high to be formed if this thing is going to come down. Meaning that if you do see the weekly close above, especially that 200 simple moving average right there, that white moving average, which has been rejecting this thing for the past 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, going on 6 weeks. Well, if we start to see closures above there, I would look at that as an indication that this thing is breaking out. We should see a quick move back towards the September 2024 highs, probably continue upwards and onwards from there. That would obviously put massive downside pressure on Bitcoin and cryptos in general. But for right now, as long as this thing is still below 5.5%, especially on those higher term timeframe closures, not a daily, but in this case, like a weekly, there is potential for this to form a high here. And that would be the bullish scenario. That would be the bullish scenario for Bitcoin, more specifically, is this thing coming back down. However, there is a very, very obvious area now, not just to the upside to define a breakout, but also to the downside to define a breakdown and, likely confirm Bitcoin is going to try, a nice upside move. And that would be essentially Wednesday's low of about 15%. And if we see it come back down below there, I'd call this one reversing and be looking for this thing to come much lower. So as of right now, we Tether dominance is still stuck within this overall range. So there's not really any major analysis to be made there, but it should be known that we do see drives of hidden bearish divergence come off this last high. So as long as it's below that 200 simple, I do still hold on to some hopium here for Bitcoin, especially as long as Bitcoin is above again that March low that we've been speaking about so many times here. But here's the thing, in the short term, I do think that Bitcoin is going to inevitably be playing out a little bit of catch up here. In yesterday's video, like I said, we were looking for some downside, again, somewhere between $79,000 to $8,100, sorry, not $8,100, but $81,000, a little bit of a lower target, I guess. And we almost got it. It looks like Bitcoin came very, very close to 81 there, but this is still setting up for likely another downside try. We saw that the hidden bearish divergence potential yesterday has now been confirmed as of last night's closure, and this is also going to be combined with low volatility. So there is a move a brewing, and a decent move at that. And on top of that, my new indicator over here, which I'm still playing around with, but this got a bearish signal pending last night's closure as well. So that did confirm it. Now, it's not a death signal. I do think that, at worst, this thing will come back down and retest somewhere around $79,000, just this white 200 simple moving average on the daily time frame here for specifically CME. And again, that would be actually a little bit above $79,000 as of right now. But that is where I'd really want to see things hold if Bitcoin really is going to dig itself out, pick itself up by its bootstraps, and continue with the upwards and onwards market cycle. But yeah, that would imply still likely another of downside try in the short term. That's also going to be combined, by the way, with daily stochastic momentum continuing to the downside here. We identified that this one crossed to the downside over the past couple of days. Now it's just continuing to the downside. So downside pressure is abound as long as Bitcoin is below the momentum pivot of 86,700. So, as long as this is positioned to the downside, as long as we see hidden bearish divergence on that daily time frame, I do have to be short term at minimum looking for downside. Now, we should probably talk about what would happen if Bitcoin does break those March lows. I do think that you'll see a relatively quick move down to extremely low 70s, like 70 even, something like that, and probably try for a big bounce there. But I don't think that would be the actual low. I think we'd be in like a real bear market at that time where, you get these moves to the downside, you get these consolidations where it tries a nice little short-term upside move, and then they just completely get crushed. And we really haven't seen that for a long time. In most markets, to be fair, and we're starting to see it in traditional markets. Despite me thinking that the short term is a bounce, I don't think that the bounce is going to materialize into a macro low here. I really do think that things come lower for traditional markets, especially looking at time frames like the quarterly here. I mean, that's a swing high. So after you find a swing high, you got to find a swing low. It can be a lower low, it can be a higher low, but it is going to be a low. And the low unlikely to come in just one candle right here. And this is a quarterly chart. So that brings us into the end of June. Or is it the end of June? We have April, May, June. Yeah, end of June. My brain is just absolutely fucking crushed today. Anyways. Let me get back onto my notes over here, and let me just make sure that I have hit everything that we wanted to get into. Yeah, for the rest of it, again, just kind of rehashing our conversation yesterday about the timing of this. The timing of this still, I would be defensive, looking for potential downside between now and a little bit before the end of this next coming week. So a little bit less than, let's say, within the next 5 to 6 days is when I'd be defensive, because Bitcoin is going to play out a downside move. It likely happens within that time frame, and again, that would be a catch up for traditional markets, so something to be aware of there. Anyways, other than that, I actually completely forgot to bring up this point as well, but let's just quickly go over to it. The HPDR indicator over here, let's just see again what the weekly is looking like for CME. And what's the weekly looking like? Well, rejection of the 38.2 level, but basing at the 61.8 level. So we don't really have anything of super significance here, but it does suggest that if there's going to be a direction, it's going to be the downside as of right now. Maybe the daily has something for us. Yeah, daily also downside pressure here. I think that's kind of obvious. Retesting around yesterday's low, I think is very, very likely, maybe even a little bit lower. Like I said, below $80,000 could very easily happen within this next 5 to 6 day spread, I suspect. So, I figured that we should find out relatively soon how these things are going to work out. But the positions or the areas of action remain unchanged here, and that's really what I want to be holding on to in a video like this. So, again, to the downside, it's the March lows. To the upside, we could actually move it down priorly from $93,000, the March 6th high, now to actually, I would even say Wednesday's high, this past Wednesday. If Bitcoin can close a daily time frame above that, above 88,600, about 88,600, yeah. Sorry, $88,640, by the way. If we can see a closure above there on a daily time frame, I'd say that would be a damn good indication that Bitcoin is going to be pulling through to the upside. So those are the two triggers that I'm waiting for. Again, I do think that there is the potential for a long-term setup as long as Bitcoin is basing between here. But that long-term setup gets completely nullified again below the March lows. Below the March lows on any sort of higher term time frame closure is very, I look at it as very, 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 very bad. Anyways. Until that happens, though, hoping remains alive, and there are several signals that have worked out very well in the past, like the hash ribbons. Signal, like the 5-day HPDRO signal, like what else did we have? I think there's a couple other ones as well, but they're escaping my mind right now. So those are still active, but again, even those get nullified below that March low. So we shall see, and I suspect it's not going to take too much longer to find out. But if you are looking for downside, I do think it's going to be happening within the next 5 days. If Bitcoin fails to really move to new lows within the next 5, maybe 6 days, I'd say that would also be a good sign just from the sort of timing component of of this. Remember the April statistics. In general, for April, if it's going to be a positive closing month, we expect the low to come in very early within the month and very shallow from the open, about a 3.5% difference on average between the open and the low in positive closing Aprils, which is a much less number, by the way, than many other months that we've seen. So, again, putting that into perspective here, I think we've already done this as well, but 3.5% to the downside from the April open would be about $80,000 even. So even, from that perspective, assuming that things were going to close green in the month of April, we'd still be expecting, at least a downside try. So I do think that it's still time to be defensive, especially if you're on the lower term timeframes. If you're on the higher term timeframes, if you're a long-term investor, which I've been getting more and more into myself. I made a tweet about this the other day, but Bitcoin's 30% off the highs. I'm going to put some money, to work in an environment like that. I'm just going to, as a long-term investment, thinking 5, 10, 15 years down the road. Maybe that's relevant to you. Maybe that's not. I fully accept that things can go, decently lower from where we're at right now. Like I said, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Bitcoin around $50,000. But at the end of the day, nobody fucking knows. So that's why we take our chances based off of the probabilities that we can find. Anyways, other than that, I think that's a good place for me to be leaving off on this particular video. We're going to continue on with the live stream here on YouTube and actually Twitter as well. I'm very excited to have Twitter in the mix here too. And yeah, we'll be back on tomorrow with another regular analysis. With all of that said, take care, much love, and see you hopefully Saturday.